Ukraine is run by the collective West. Former Rada MPs reveal who really runs Ukraine. It is not Z who governs Ukraine, but the US. Washington officially confirms external governance of Ukraine. The Russian propaganda media have been planting such stories in Russian citizens' heads since the beginning of 2014, and I was curious to find out for myself whether these statements correspond to reality. And to my surprise, I can say the following. The US influence on Ukraine is present, but it's not so black and white. A word of warning, watch this video to the end, otherwise you will only see a one-sided picture. The most popular evidence of US influence on Ukraine came during the Euromaidan. First, a bit of history. Since 2007, the Ukrainian side has begun talking about choosing the European vector of development. Both Yushchenko and Yanukovych, the Ukrainian presidents of their times, talked about it. On the 28th of November 2013, Ukraine was due to sign an association agreement with the European Union in Vilnius, but a week before, on the 21st of November, the Ukrainian government announced that it was refusing to sign the agreements and had decided to resume dialogue with Russia. After which, people took to the streets. We're not going deep into the Maidan debacle now. Things began to move, people began to change, and this change of people in power in Ukraine was discussed by the US. There is a recording of a private conversation between Assistant Secretary of State Victoria Nuland and the US Ambassador to Ukraine Jeffrey Pyatt. In the conversation, they discussed the composition of the desired Ukrainian government. Well, for example, that Klitschko and Tykhanibok would not be included in the government, but that Yatsenyuk seemed like an okay guy.
So, I don't think Klitsch should go into the government. I don't think it's necessary. I don't think it's a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, I guess in terms of him not going into the government, just let him sort of stay out and do his political homework and stuff. We want to keep the moderate Democrats together. The problem is going to be Tykhanibok and his guys. And, you know, I'm sure that's part of what Yanukovych is calculating on all of this.
I think Yats is the guy who's got the economic experience, the governing experience. He's the guy, you know, what he needs is Klitsch and Tykhanibok on the outside. He needs to be talking to them 4 times a week, you know. I just think Klitsch going in, he's going to be at that level working for Yatsenyuk. It's just not going to work.
In reality, it happened exactly that way. The first government was formed under Yatsenyuk. Klitschko was given the role of mayor of Kiev, and Tykhanibok did not end up in the government, although 3 of his co-partisans did. The conversation ends with the idea that they need the vice president of the time and the current president of today, Joe Biden, to resolve the issues.
So on that piece, Jeff, when I wrote the note, Sullivan's come back to me, VFR, saying you need Biden, and I said probably tomorrow for an attaboy and to get the deeds to stick. So okay. Biden's willing.
Okay, great.
All right.
Thanks.
If you have a question, what has Biden got to do with it all? He was overseeing the Ukrainian direction at the time. You could recall the sequence of further events. The government changed. Yanukovych fled to Rostov. Poroshenko became president. The agreements with the EU were signed after all. We talked about it in more detail in our previous video. It may seem that since 2014, all of Ukraine's elites have suddenly become pro-Western and started to turn away from Russia, but it is in fact more complicated than that. The pro-Russian forces did not vanish after one Euromaidan. Yes, their concentration has become lower. In reality, though, 3 forces of interest have formed in the same territory: pro-Western, local, and pro-Russian. So these forces quarreled, negotiated, threatened, and blackmailed each other. The usual political routine, you know. Since we are primarily interested in American influence, we're going to tell you a fascinating story about a president caught up in corruption, patronage of his relatives, and blackmail. Yes, my dears, the time has come to learn about the other side of the coin.
Light will win over darkness. Thank you.
Our story begins with Ukrainian oligarch Mykola Zlochevsky. In 2002, he founded a major oil and gas company, Burisma Holding, which is still in operation today. He was also, suddenly, an associate of Yanukovych, the pro-Russian president, during whose term one of the largest Russian-Ukrainian conflicts took place. In fact, this oligarch held high government positions as well. He was the Minister of Ecology, which happily coincided with his business interests. And of course, Minister Zlochevsky helped entrepreneur Zlochevsky obtain licenses for operations. But then Euromaidan happened. His usual shelter, embodied in the President Yanukovych, flew off to Rostov in Russia, and then new forces emerged in Ukraine with who to negotiate. And what is Zlochevsky doing? Is he trying to build a relationship with future head of government Yatsenyuk or a president at the time, Poroshenko? No. In this mess, and I remind you that we have February to May 2014 on the calendar, in this mess Zlochevsky is acting more pragmatically. He hires a certain person to the board of directors of his company, Hunter Biden. Yes, the son of the current US President, Joseph Biden, is being used as a talisman against adversity. You may have heard of him because of the leaked private photos from his own laptop before the last US presidential election, but the private photos are only part, and not the most important, in fact. The most important part is the found correspondence between Hunter and Burisma's representatives, which we will show a little further on. Material from his laptop proved to be a real bomb in the US media space. There was a whole campaign to save the image of the Biden family and the Trump accusation, shifting the focus away from the corruption element. So, Hunter, in May 2014, takes a seat on the board of directors of a Ukrainian oil and gas company. The son of an American vice president who has no experience in the chemicals industry becomes a safeguard against possible upheaval from the new government. He was paid $50,000 a month for such an unorthodox job. By the way, there was yet another kryptonite from the new authorities. A former Polish president was also invited to join the board almost immediately after the January 2014 things in Ukraine began. And along with Hunter Biden came a certain Devon Archer. We'll need him a bit later. Now, here's the funny thing. What you see on your screen is the Burisma Holdings website, but it's not a website of today. This is what it looked like in 2015. You're looking at a screenshot from the web archive. If you type in burisma.com now, there is a redirect to the site with the name Best Ride USA. The site's admin is definitely sending us some signals, and by the end of the video, you'll know what they are. But it is actually more serious than that. After Euromaidan, the West and the US have been pushing the topic of fighting corruption, creating all sorts of NGOs in Ukraine for that cause. And here this situation with Biden Jr. appears. A bit embarrassing, isn't it? There was even an entire report in the US Senate on this event entitled Hunter Biden, Burisma and Corruption, which explicitly described. On April 16, 2014, Vice President Biden met with his son's business partner, Devon Archer, at the White House. 5 days later, Vice President Biden visited Ukraine. The day after his visit, on April 22nd, Archer joined the board of Burisma. 14 days later, on May 12th, Hunter Biden joined the board of Burisma, and over the course of the next several years, Hunter Biden and Devon Archer were paid millions of dollars from a corrupt Ukrainian oligarch for their participation on the board. There's a lot of Hunter's shady dealings in this report in general, and it ends with the conclusion that for some reason everyone is keeping silent and not moving a muscle. We could get stuck in the Democrat-Republican struggle for a long time, but we'll get back to our video's topic. Here we come to the second act, the confrontation between the US elites and the local Ukrainian ones.
Now, this story involves three main players: Joe Biden, his son Hunter, and a man who was the top prosecutor in Ukraine named Viktor Shokin.
So, a quick reminder of the mise-en-scène. After the Euromaidan, Mykola Zlochevsky, an oligarch and Yanukovych associate, recruited Hunter Biden and Devon Archer to his company Burisma to defend against possible questions from the newly formed Ukrainian government. And the questions did indeed come from Prosecutor General Viktor Shokin. Mr. Shokin has opened several criminal cases against Burisma. But don't think that Shokin is a nice and righteous buddy in the uniform in this story. We're discussing politics here, so don't forget to wash your hands after watching this video. Shokin was Poroshenko's man, and according to one version, he just wanted some Mr. Green in his pocket.
Dear Hunter and Devon, as previously pointed out on a number of occasions, the representatives of new authorities in power tend to quite aggressively approach NZ unofficially with the aim to obtain cash from him. Initially, it was done by the representatives of Svoboda Party and the Ministry of Internal Affairs. These so-called unofficial communications would entail blackmailing. In case we don't cooperate, that is, provide money in cash, the gas production business of NZ would be stopped, destroyed, etc. It's important to note that Svoboda Party is represented in the government by the General Prosecutor and by Minister of Ecology and Natural Resources of Ukraine. After unsuccessful attempts to receive funds from our side, they proceeded with concrete actions. We urgently need your advice on how you could use your influence to convey a message or signal, etc., to stop what we consider to be politically motivated actions.
This is a letter from Vadim Pasharsky, Burisma's representative, found in Hunter's laptop. I advise you not to look for good and bad people now. This is not Lord of the Rings. Everyone here is a bit orcish and a bit elfish. The point is that the local Attorney General has started to cause problems for Burisma. In response to these problems, Hunter called his father for some assistance. Then Daddy shows up.
So, Petya, I have a decree on my desk about allocating $1 billion in economic aid to Ukraine, but I need you to fire the prosecutor general, otherwise you will be screwed and will never see the $1 billion.
Yes, it might seem unbelievable to you now for a US president to say that, but
Assuming that there is a new government and a new prosecutor general, I am prepared to do a public signing of the commitment for the $1 billion.
And despite of the fact that we don't have any corruption charges, don't have any information about him doing something wrong, I especially ask him to resign.
Congratulations on installing the new prosecutor general. It's going to be critical for him to work quickly to repair the damage Shokin did. And I'm a man of my word. And that now that the new prosecutor general's in place, we're ready to move forward in signing that new $1 billion loan guarantee.
the most savvy in Russian-Ukrainian conflict viewers will say. But these records were provided by Andrei Derkach, who was previously accused of having links to Russia, but now Ukraine has put him on the wanted list altogether. That's right. I'll remind you that there are no good and bad here. In this video, all those involved are self-serving and power-hungry corrupt. We, on the other hand, are only looking at the facts. And the fact is that Joe Biden, though mostly trying to save his family's reputation, acted as a cover for a Ukrainian business that bribed his son. And to remedy the situation, Biden blackmailed the president of Ukraine into eventually removing the prosecutor general. Did you think you were the only one who could be blackmailed with dirt? Presidents are ordinary people too. And the funny thing is that Biden admitted it publicly.
I said, no, I'm not going to, we're not going to give you the $1 billion. They said, you have no authority. You're not the president. The president said. I said, call him. I said, I'm telling you, you're not getting the $1 billion. I said, you're not getting the $1 billion. I'm going to be leaving here. And I think it was, 6 hours? I looked, I said, I'm leaving in 6 hours. If the prosecutor's not fired, you're not getting the money. Well, son of a bitch. Got fired. And they put in place someone who was solid.
Yeah, it's as simple as that. Although Biden messed up the dates a bit, Shokin was sacked after 6 months rather than 6 hours. But in fact, the US vice president actually admitted to blackmailing the president of an entire country, while the audience just laughs at his morbid,
"Oh, son of a bitch."
Естественно, что когда антикоррупционное бюро будет работать, то мы понятно, что будем фактически со всеми в не очень хороших отношениях.
There's a lot more to say on this topic, about how Trump has already tried to pressure Zelensky to investigate the Biden and Burisma case in order to smear a presidential rival.
My son has not made money.
But here we are to answer the question of whether there is US influence in Ukraine. By now, we have Victoria Nuland's tape and the whole Biden-Burisma case deconstructed. I now suggest listening to what Ukrainian politician Dmitry Spivak has to say.
We were, to some extent or another, under relative external influence. There was a period when this influence was from Moscow. That's unquestionable. But why, on the one hand, do you talk so zealously, negatively about aspects of Russian influence in relation to Ukraine, and pretend that you don't notice the total, fundamental, systemic external control of the US at all?
It is important to note here that Spivak has been placed by some Ukrainian media outlets on various planks of shame because he does not criticize Putin enough, criticizes the current government a lot, and frequently visits pro-Russian channels which have recently been blocked by a presidential decree. But it's this piece that's important.
I could now just list the names of high-ranking agents of influence of various multinational corporations, Western intelligence services, US Embassy, etc. All right, let's go. Kontoleva, Abromovichus, Leshchenko, former Prime Minister Hunchaluk, etc. These are all people with dual citizenship, settled in leadership roles. Moreover, all the supervisory boards, and this is a fact, it's not my idea, all the supervisory boards of all our state monopolies consist of Ukrainian citizens. And as you understand, they are not tram drivers or locksmiths. They are agents of various secret services. What are supervisory boards of monopolies about? They're about control over financial, economic and political activities of the state. It is no secret that the G7, the US Embassy, are bluntly preventing, for example, Sitnik from being fired. They say, no, this is our guy, that's it.
Who is this Sitnik guy? Now look, after Euromaidan and the signing of association agreements with the European Union, one of the demands for Ukraine was the creation of independent anti-corruption organizations. Remember the Senate report on the Biden case that stated the situation had been peculiar. On the one hand, they were forcing the fight against corruption, and on the other hand, they had the Biden-Burisma case. One of such organizations was the National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine, NABU for short. And you have already seen a screenshot from their website. After all, they were the ones who put the pro-Russian MP on the wanted list, and you will understand why shortly. How is the independence of the NABU manifested? The head and detectives are elected in an open competition with US and EU support. Artyom Sitnik was put at the helm, and then the wars of three forces began, Western, Russian and Ukrainian. The NABU detained the son of the Ukrainian interior minister, The Prosecutor General's office detained NABU agents who were working undercover, and the Prosecutor General's office said that the director of the bureau, Artyom Sitnik, failed in his duties. By the way, it was no longer Shokin from the Biden-Burisma case as a Prosecutor General, but his successor, Yuri Lutsenko. Ultimately, local forces tried to remove Sitnik several times, but the fact is that he cannot be dismissed at will by any local authority. This bureau is an independent body. In 2017, the Verkhovna Rada registered a bill that would have allowed Sitnik to be dismissed by Parliament. But it was no longer Biden who came to his defense, but Christine Lagarde, head of the International Monetary Fund.
We urge the Ukrainian authorities and Parliament to safeguard the independence of NABU and Specialized Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office.
The dismissal was postponed, but the effort has not subsided. The Ukrainian court finds Sitnik corrupt in 2019. In 2020, 2 more bills were registered which added a reason for dismissal, a corruption offense. And here again, the IMF comes to the defense. They write a letter to the president's office hinting that, "Don't touch our NABU or you won't get any money."
As you know, the institutional independence of the NABU and its chairman are critical components of its effectiveness and were therefore important elements of previous IMF programs. Any legislative changes that narrow the NABU's independence will be perceived as a repudiation of previous anti-corruption commitments and will require adjustments to any new IMF cooperation program with Ukraine.
We've already seen something similar from Biden, who was blackmailing with a refusal to sign the $1 billion loan. But even recently, the Ukrainian elite have not given up, and at the end of 2021, a court issued a statement wishing to investigate whether Sitnik is a foreign spy for the US. Don't get me wrong, it may seem that I'm rooting for the idea that the NABU is an agent of the West and is taking over the country. No, I'm sure that the NABU has solved many cases and saved the Ukrainian budget millions of hryvnias. But I'm also sure that this body can be used by the West to do its bidding, including weakening the pro-Russian elites in Ukraine. There is a propaganda stigma in the Russian information field. Puppets of the West and decision-making centers. This generalizing and highly simplifying label paints a negative image for the average person. Well, Ukrainians are now controlled by the Anglo-Saxons, and now they are thinking about how to destroy the Russian nation. In this video, we brought up all the compromising dirt we could find. And what did we find in the end? Is there US influence in Ukraine? Of course there is, but first, it is the way of the world that large states like the US, China and Russia extend their influence beyond their own borders. Even in the same recording, Piat expresses apprehension at Russia's actions.
I think we've got to do something to make it stick together, because you can be pretty sure that if it does start to gain altitude, the Russians will be working behind the scenes to try to torpedo it.
From the recent past, we can recall how in 2020, at a time of large-scale protests over election fraud in Belarus, Russia extended a $1.5 billion loan to Lukashenko. Somehow, we are not saying here that Lukashenko is Putin's puppet. On the contrary, more often he is talked about as a trickster sitting on 2 chairs at the same time. This money helped Lukashenko to stay in power. He pursued his interests as well. Or here, Russia will once again lend Belarus $1.5 billion, unlikely for a nice moustache. Secondly, US influence is not absolute. It meets resistance from time to time. Look at this. Piat points out that someone else needs to be brought in and work with Klitschko, not to order him what to do. Yanukovych needs to be contacted somehow as well.
So let me work on Klitschko, and if you can just keep, I think we want to try to get somebody with an international personality to come out here and help to midwife this thing. And then the other issue is some kind of outreach to Yanukovych, but we probably regroup on that tomorrow as we see how things start to fall into place.
Moreover, there is a moment in the tape where Nuland expresses dissatisfaction with what she sees as the passive stance of the EU.
So that would be great, I think, to help glue this thing and have the UN help glue it. And, fuck the EU.
She literally said we should fuck the EU for being passive. It says that there is no lined-up Western vertical where everything is done at the behest of the top. There is a need to negotiate. Then, don't forget that it was Yanukovych's associate, oligarch Zlochevsky, who bribed Biden, not the other way round. And during the process of replacement of Prosecutor General Shokin, the motive was not to seize power in the country, but Biden's best self-interest, to save his family's reputation as much as possible. And the tool he used was a pretty big one, a $1 billion blackmail. Biden did not just order, "Take this one away, I don't like him." Such a relationship certainly cannot be called a relationship between a king and his subjects, and Poroshenko too has openly expressed his displeasure.
And despite of the fact that we didn't have any corruption charges, we don't have any information about he doing something wrong, I especially ask him to resign.
By the way, do you know what the new prosecutor Lutsenko has done? He has initiated another case against Burisma's owner Zlochevsky. Again, it's unlike the behavior of a humble servant of the West. By the way, I assume that after Hunter Biden's protectorate ultimately failed, Burisma's owners redirected Burisma.com to Best Ride USA, publicly claiming they were taken for a hell of a ride and then carted off. You remember the constant struggle between the Ukrainian Prosecutor General's office and the Anti-Corruption Bureau, where the IMF threatened to withhold funding if Syednik was tried and removed from his post. By the way, there is also resistance from the Ukrainian authorities in another anti-corruption NGO. For 2 years now, the authorities have been unable to approve a prosecutor in the Specialized Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office, causing displeasure in Washington. Once again, there are no good and bad here. And for those who are watching our channel for the first time, check out our other videos, of which there are many about the Russian system of governance. We have been dealing here exclusively with the US influence in Ukraine. It is clear that there is still a huge Russian influence there. I mean, ex-president of Ukraine Yanukovych fled to us and is still sitting here. Probably all the names you've heard during the video are tied up in corruption and pursuing their own powerful interests. Politics is a dirty business. Understand, I am not making excuses for Putin. But if we're discussing the conflict, we must consider not Russia's role only, but also that of the US in the ongoing chaos. So it turns out that the US is not so white and fuzzy, and Russia has started a war not exactly unprovoked, as they say. All we are witnessing is a political conflict between major powers for the right to rule the destinies of other nations. It only sounds innocent, a conflict, but in fact, this conflict will be at the cost of thousands of lives of ordinary people and hundreds of thousands of distorted destinies of Ukrainians and Russians. As usual, the highest price will be paid by the common people. You know who to share this video with and how to create activity in the comments. We're saying a huge thank you for our supporters from Patreon for staying with us and watching our stuff. And I'm the researcher.